Alright, English custard tarts. What we got is a fairly deep, nice pie dish. I like these enamel ones, they really cook it nice. I've got the oven set to 140 degrees Celsius, which is about 220 Fahrenheit, I believe, around about there. And I've got a sheet of pre-made shortcrust pastry. I particularly don't enjoy making pastry very much, so I tend to buy it in when I do. If this isn't available where you are, there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube where you can actually learn to make shortcrust pastry and puff pastry and every other kind of pastry just about. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to get this dish buttered, and then I'll show you how I get the pastry into the dish. Other things I've got is you'll need a knife, and this wonderful knife, look at that, in its own plastic scabbard, which is very handy if you want to take it away with you. This knife was given to me by Taste of Trini when I went to see her in New York, and it is a fabulous knife. It keeps a really good edge, and it's extremely sharp. It's got a nice hologram blade, so it makes it really, really good for slicing, and it keeps a fabulously keen edge. And it's got this lovely scabbard. I keep going on about that, but that is so handy when you want to take your knives away. Also is this lovely silicone spatula with all the measurements on it and the conversions on it, which is really useful. It's got a lovely sort of, I think there's a bamboo handle which is really nice and stable. So I really, really love that. I thought I'd show you that. I've also got some chopping mats, but I will show them in a later video. And thanks to lovely Taste of Trini for those wonderful gifts. Thank you. Right. Right, I'm just going to grease that up, and I'm going to take a bit of butter and a piece of kitchen paper, and then just grease it right out to the edges. Now I really want to get right out to the edges so that the crust lifts away from the pie dish when I come to serve it. So that's all in there, and that's it. That's there. Now I lift up my pastry and just drape it over the pie dish. I'm going to put that to one side because you see I'll be using that in a second. And drape it over the pie dish like that. And then instead of pushing down in the middle, I lift up the corners and push it in evenly. The colder this pastry is when you work with it, the easier it will be. Unfortunately, I left it out under the light for a time. And what you don't want to do yet is you don't want to trim off those edges, and there's a good reason for that, and you'll see. Right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bake that blind in the oven for a little while, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to put in that piece of, just a piece of that sort of kitchen paper, and I'm going to introduce you to these lovely little things. These are called baking beans. Now you can use rice, you can use chickpeas, dried chickpeas, but I like these little ceramic baking beans. They're really useful. And what I do is I pour them into the pastry case. They're just little ceramic beans, and I push them out to the edges of the pie dish. They'll all go in those, but and there's a handy little kilner jar there if you ever need it. There we go. And then that goes into the oven for initially round about 15 minutes. So I'm going to pop that onto a baking tray, and then as it is, and then put it into the oven. So there you go, simple as that, and that goes in the oven now 15 minutes. Right, just while that's baking off, the other ingredients you'll need some fresh eggs, you'll need some whole milk, You'll need some nutmeg and you'll need some vanilla extract. Okay, we're going to use around about 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. The principal flavour on this comes from nutmeg, and you'll also need some sugar. So what I'm going to do now is quickly run through making the custard filling for the custard tart. Alright, the first thing I want to do is introduce the sweetness into the milk. So into this recipe is going to go about 2.5 cups of milk. So I'm going to take actually just 1 cup of milk at this point. That's just slightly less than a cup of milk at this point, and I'm going to nuke that in the microwave until it comes up to heat, and then I'm going to dissolve a couple of tablespoons of sugar into it. Okay, that's the milk warmed up, so now we're just going to put in a couple of level tablespoons, because it's not terribly sweet tart, this one, of sugar. I only use this type of sugar, I don't use white sugar. White sugar is white death. Right, I mix that in till the sugar's dissolved. And then I add the remainder of the milk. So that's 1 cup, 2 cups, and let's just measure it right and do 1/2 cup. There we go. So, and into that we want to put about 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. This is really good quality Madagascan vanilla extract. I get that from my local shop, but there are lots and lots of good producers of vanilla at the moment. And the other option, of course, is you can heat your milk up with a real vanilla pod and scrape out the vanilla paste as well, if you prefer it that way. And then into this goes 3 eggy weggies. So that's 1, 2, and 3. And we give that a good old, give that a good old beating and make up a nice custard. Now in a fancy French kitchen you'd probably be putting this through a sieve and until all the egg was done, but I actually prefer to digest my own food rather than have it digested before it actually goes in my stomach. So there we go, and then that makes it up to a nice custard. There's the custard mixed up and ready to pour into the custard tart. Alright, we've given it about 15-20 minutes at, I said 140, I gave that about 15 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius. And then what we can do now, we'll transfer the beans out of here, and I'll put them on the side to cool off. Right, that's the baking beans out of the way, and now we've got to the stage where we've got the pie is now, the pie crust is fitted to the outside of the pie bowl, and it will not now shrink significantly. So what we can do is we can actually trim this off now, and the way I do that is I lift this up, get underneath it, and just trim that off along the side using the sharp knife. And it's going to create a mess, so what I'll do is I'll do that and then I'll get back to you. Alright, that's the pie trimmed off, and you'll see I trim it off flush with the edges of the pie dish. And the very next thing in the first custard tart I'm going to show you, all that we simply do now is pour in the custard we made, and if we got the quantities right, it should come up to about there. There we go. And the next thing we do is we grate on some nutmeg. Now the principal flavour of this is nutmeg, so we can get rather generous with the nutmeg. And I like to put quite a lot on. And I think you might agree that that's rather a lot. It's about a quarter of a nutmeg actually. But there you go, that's gone on. So that's the nutmeg tart. Now that goes back into the oven at 140 degrees Celsius for around about 40 minutes. So we'll do that now, taking care not to spill it as you put it in the oven. Right, the next variant on the custard tart I'm going to do is fairly similar to the last one with a couple of additions. The flavourings are different, and we call this one Manchester tart. Now there are quite a few differing recipes for Manchester tart, and they generally use pre-made custard poured into a pie crust, and they will flavour it with fruits and all sorts. Well, the one I'm going to attempt to make is going to be very similar to the one that we were served up in school dinners and also in the army. So I'm going to try and get as close to that recipe as I can. So first of all, we go through all the same stages as before. I won't bore you with it. We grease the thing, we put the pastry in, we bake it blind with the beans, and when you see me next, we'll be at that stage. Alright, as you see, the only difference I've done with this, I've trimmed it slightly around the edges because it makes it a little easier to manage, and I've also forked down a pattern along the edge, which will leave it a slightly different pattern to the other one, and exactly the same as before. We fill it with the baking beans and it goes in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. There we go. Alright, we've baked the second tart. Removing those, I'll put those out of the way for now. And we've got to the basic pie bottom, and this is where it differs, because here we introduce some strawberry jam. You can use raspberry jam, strawberry jam, but a nice red jam of your choice, and this is a super one. I'm putting in a generous tablespoon and possibly another one. Let's see how it spreads out. In the warmth of the pie, it'll spread out nicely. This is a particularly nice one. You can see the large pieces of fruit in it. So get a good one. Don't be a bum. Get a good one. Okay. Check this out. And then the other little thing that we add for flavour here is desiccated coconut, which is just dried coconut. And I'm going to add about a teaspoon of that as a sprinkle, and I put it on the jam before we put the custard on, and that's so that the coconut flavour comes and pops up through the custard, gives us that nice flavour. So and we also keep a little bit of this aside to dress the tart at the end. So just as before, we top that up with our custard, exactly the same type of custard as before, and we top that right up. Don't worry about any floaty bits, they only add to the character. And that tops right up there, and that goes back in the oven 140 degrees for about 40 minutes, just like the other one. Okay, the first egg custard is now making an appearance, and there we go. Doesn't that look gorgeous? What you can do is put an extra an extra coating of nutmeg on top of that, but I don't think I need to in this case. It really looks good. So what I'm going to do now is put that aside to cool off, and what we do now with this is this pie is best eaten chilled, so we wait till it goes cool, then we stick it in the fridge, leave it in the fridge for an hour or 2 hours, and then serve it. So when we actually come to serve it, I'll get the camera out and film it. That's English egg custard tart. Alright, that's the second one out of the oven now, and what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is cover the top with a little layer of jam, and that will become apparent why. Just be careful how you paint it on, because the top is still, you probably see some movement on it, it's still wobbly, and that will set as it cools. But I'm going to take that right to the corner and just make sure that's covered. So that goes under the egg, and it goes on top of the egg custard. And brushed all over evenly. And then the very last thing we do with this is we give it a good old coating of desiccated coconut. You can get generous with that if you like, that's up to you, however you like it. I love coconut, so it's no problem for me. So there you go, 2 tarts. Again, what I'll do is I'll let this cool off. I'll trim the pie up, let it cool off, and then I'll show you when we come to cut it once it's cooled off. So that's a British egg custard Manchester tart. So there's the English custard tart. That's cooled down and ready for slicing. If you check it out, it's got nice and firm, nice custard, nice eggy custard, and a nice flaky short pastry. So there you go, enjoy. And there we go, that's the Manchester tart, for all the world looking like a school pud. And you can see the layer of jam on the bottom, and the coconut flavour and the jam flavour come up through the custard as well. So there you go, 2 types of English custard tart. The first one, plain English custard tart with nutmeg, and the second one is a custard tart flavoured with a Manchester custard tart flavoured with in this case strawberry jam and desiccated coconut. Enjoy!